Imagine for a quiet moment in your life, when everything seems to be unfolding in the most ordinary way, that the reality around you might not be as random as you have always believed. The unexpected encounters, the opportunities that appear at just the right moment, or even the challenges that seem to repeat themselves in your life. What if none of these are simply luck or coincidence? What if there is an invisible mechanism silently operating behind every event in your life? A mechanism that does not exist somewhere outside in the world, but within you. What if the reality you experience is not merely something you live inside of, but something that is constantly responding to the energy you project every day? Across many ancient traditions, from Eastern meditation practices to Western philosophies of consciousness, a simple but profound principle has often been repeated. Where your attention goes, energy begins to move. And when energy continues to move in a particular direction long enough, the external world seems to reorganize itself around that movement. This suggests that the thoughts you repeatedly hold in your mind, the fears you dwell on, the desires you chase, and even the memories you struggle to release, may all quietly influence the path your life follows. But here is the part that makes many people pause and reflect. If this idea holds any truth, it could mean that many of us have unknowingly spent years reinforcing the very circumstances we wish to avoid. Think about that for a moment. What if the patterns that appear again and again in your life are not simply random events, but reflections of something deeper happening within your mind? And what if shifting the direction of your attention could begin to open entirely new possibilities? Welcome to the Inner Code, a place where we explore the hidden principles behind consciousness and reality that most people were never taught how to see. If these questions spark curiosity in you or awaken something deeper within, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and support the Inner Code. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful and thought-provoking videos in the future. And before we dive deeper into this exploration, consider a simple but powerful question. What do you believe truly shapes the experiences that happen in your life? A. External circumstances and random events beyond your control. B. The direction of your attention and the energy you place into the world. Share your answer by commenting A or B below. After asking yourself whether reality might reflect where you place your attention, another possibility begins to unfold, one that quietly challenges the way we have always interpreted the world around us. Throughout human history, different cultures and philosophical traditions, from ancient sages to modern researchers studying consciousness, have suggested that the external world may not be entirely separate from the internal state of the observer. They were not claiming that reality is simply an illusion, nor were they suggesting that we can control everything with mere thoughts. Instead, they pointed towards something far more subtle. Life may respond differently depending on the level of awareness we bring into each moment. Consider how two people can enter the exact same situation and walk away with completely different experiences. One person may see opportunity, while another only notices obstacles. One individual senses growth and possibility, while another feels trapped and discouraged. The physical circumstances may be nearly identical, yet the direction of their attention leads them to notice entirely different aspects of the same reality. This observation reveals something fascinating. Attention is not merely a passive mental activity. It acts as a filter that determines what we notice, how we interpret events, and ultimately how we respond to them. When your attention repeatedly focuses on a particular idea or possibility, your brain begins to prioritize information that supports that focus. Opportunities that were once invisible become easier to recognize. Patterns that once seemed unrelated start to connect in meaningful ways. Gradually, a new chain of decisions and actions begins to form. From this perspective, reality is not simply a rigid structure that we react to. It behaves more like a dynamic system that interacts with the way we observe it. This does not mean that every event in life is fully under our control, because the world will always contain unpredictability and circumstances beyond our influence. However, it does suggest that the direction of our attention profoundly shapes how we interpret and navigate the experiences that unfold around us. When people begin to recognize this pattern, they often realize that many recurring situations in their lives are not entirely random. Instead, they resemble feedback signals, quietly revealing where their mental energy has been directed over time. When attention remains fixed on fear, the mind continues searching for evidence that confirms that fear. When attention shifts toward growth and possibility, new paths gradually become visible. And it is precisely at this intersection between attention and perception that a powerful question begins to emerge. If the way we focus our awareness can shape the way we experience reality, could it also be possible to learn how to guide that attention consciously? This question marks the beginning of a deeper journey, one in which life is no longer seen as a random sequence of events, but as a complex interaction between the observer and the world unfolding around them. If the previous idea has already led you to reflect more deeply on the role of attention in shaping experience, the next step is to examine what this principle might mean on a personal level in your own life. Because once this concept moves beyond abstract philosophy and becomes a lens through which you observe your own experiences, many people begin to notice something striking. The repeating patterns in life may not always be random coincidences. Think back to moments in your life when similar situations seem to appear again and again in slightly different forms. Perhaps it was relationships that carried the same emotional challenges, career opportunities that followed familiar cycles of hope and disappointment, or recurring worries that surfaced every time you approached a major decision. Many people interpret these patterns as simple bad luck or unfortunate timing. Yet when viewed from a different perspective, these repeating experiences can resemble reflections of something deeper unfolding within a person's inner world. When an individual repeatedly focuses on feelings of insecurity, the mind begins to unconsciously search for signals that confirm that belief. When someone consistently anticipates failure, they tend to notice the smallest indicators that something might go wrong. Over time, this direction of attention does more than shape interpretation. It influences choices, communication, risk-taking, and the willingness to recognize opportunities when they appear. Gradually, a subtle but powerful feedback loop forms. Familiar thoughts lead to familiar decisions, and those decisions often generate familiar outcomes. From the outside, these events may appear unrelated, as though life is simply delivering a series of independent circumstances. But from within the perspective of the individual experiencing them, those events may be connected by an ongoing flow of attention and mental energy. When people begin to recognize this possibility, it often leads to a profound shift in perspective. Instead of feeling as though life is happening to them without explanation, they begin asking whether their own patterns of attention might be influencing the situations they encounter. This question is not about blaming oneself for difficulties that have occurred. Rather, it opens the door to a deeper sense of personal agency. If attention can reinforce existing patterns, it may also have the potential to redirect them. This does not mean that simply changing focus will instantly transform every circumstance in life. Reality remains complex, and many factors remain beyond individual control. Yet the principle suggests that within each person there is always some degree of influence over how experiences are perceived, interpreted, and responded to. When individuals recognize that what they repeatedly focus on can quietly shape how they see opportunities, relationships, and challenges, they often begin to feel a new level of responsibility toward the direction of their attention. At that moment, the idea we began with is no longer just an intriguing theory. It becomes an invitation to examine one's own life more honestly and more deeply. Because if the patterns in life truly reflect where attention has been placed over time, then learning to recognize and gradually redirect that attention may be one of the first meaningful steps toward breaking old cycles and opening the possibility for a very different future. Once a person begins to recognize that recurring patterns in life may be closely connected to where their attention is directed, a natural question emerges. If attention truly carries this kind of influence, how can it be understood and used more consciously? This is the point where our exploration begins to take a clearer direction, because answering that question requires us to first understand a fundamental principle about how energy operates within human experience. In many philosophical and psychological traditions, energy is not described as a mystical force, but rather as a way of explaining the movement of focus, emotion, and awareness within the mind. When your attention repeatedly returns to a particular idea, worry, or desire, the mind gradually allocates more mental resources toward processing information related to that focus. Over time, this prioritization creates a kind of internal cognitive map in which certain possibilities become more visible while others fade into the background of perception. Imagine the mind as a powerful flashlight in the darkness. The beam of light does not change the entire landscape, but it determines which parts of that landscape you are able to see most clearly. When you keep pointing that light in a particular direction long enough, you begin to notice pathways, signs, and details that you may have completely overlooked before. Human attention operates in a similar way. When your focus consistently highlights a certain type of possibility or problem, the brain gradually adapts its information processing to support that focus. This is why two individuals can face the exact same circumstances and draw entirely different conclusions. One person sees risk while another sees potential. One feels restricted while the other begins searching for solutions. The difference often lies not in the objective situation, but in where attention has been directed. For this reason, the next stage of our exploration goes beyond simply recognizing that attention influences experience. The deeper insight is that attention itself can be trained and gradually guided over time. This does not mean we gain control over every external event in the world, but it does suggest that the direction of our attention influences how we perceive opportunities, how we interpret challenges, and how we make important decisions in life. In this video, we will explore a powerful principle that has appeared across ancient wisdom traditions and is increasingly discussed in modern studies of cognition and consciousness. This principle centers on the relationship between attention, the flow of mental energy, and the way new experiences seem to emerge in a person's life over time. As this relationship becomes clearer, you may begin to see your environment differently. Instead of feeling that you are simply reacting to whatever happens around you, you may begin to notice that the way you observe and focus on life quietly participates in shaping the direction it takes. And as this understanding deepens, we will move further into a specific framework that explains how human attention may influence the way reality is experienced and interpreted over time. As we begin to see that attention can influence how we experience the world, the next step is to understand the deeper mechanism behind this principle. Because only by understanding how energy moves within human perception can we begin to see why certain patterns in life seem to repeat themselves. In many perspectives within modern psychology, as well as ancient philosophical traditions, human energy is not described as a mystical force, but as a way of describing the movement of awareness, emotion, and focus. Every time you direct your attention towards something, whether it is a goal, a concern, or a recurring thought, your mind begins allocating more cognitive resources toward that focus. This means the brain gradually filters information in a way that prioritizes signals related to what you are paying attention to. Over time, this process creates an internal orientation system in which some possibilities become clearer while others fade into the background of perception. Imagine driving along a long American highway at night that stretches for hundreds of miles. The road itself extends far beyond what you can see, but the headlights of your car illuminate only a small section directly ahead. The rest of the road still exists, yet your ability to navigate depends entirely on what falls within that narrow beam of light. Human attention works in a similar way. The world around you contains countless possibilities at any given moment, but what you actually perceive and respond to tends to be the portion that falls inside the spotlight of your attention. When attention repeatedly focuses on potential threats or problems, the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to signals that confirm those concerns. Small details that once went unnoticed begin to stand out, gradually reinforcing the belief that the environment is full of obstacles. On the other hand, when attention is directed toward learning, solutions, and opportunity, the brain begins recognizing possibilities that previously remained invisible. What makes this particularly fascinating is that the same external circumstances can lead to entirely different experiences depending on how attention is directed. When we say that attention directs energy, this does not necessarily mean that thoughts directly alter the physical world. Rather, it suggests that attention shapes how we interpret events, how we respond to situations, and how we act within the world. Over time, those responses and actions can create new chains of outcomes. This is why many researchers studying human behavior emphasize the powerful role of awareness and focus in shaping habits, decisions, and life trajectories. When you begin to understand this principle, attention no longer appears as a passive mental process. It begins to resemble a guiding instrument, almost like a psychological compass that helps navigate a world filled with possibilities. And at this point, another important question naturally arises. If attention can guide the flow of experience in such a meaningful way, do all forms of attention operate the same? Or are there different modes of attention that can lead to entirely different results in the unfolding of a person's life? The question raised earlier naturally leads us toward a deeper realization, because when we say that attention can guide the flow of experience, it does not mean that every form of attention influences our lives in the same way. In reality, there are different states of attention, and the difference between them can explain why two people may face the same event yet respond in ways that eventually lead their lives in completely different directions. In many philosophical perspectives on consciousness, as well as modern behavioral studies, researchers often describe two fundamental modes of attention. The first can be called polarized attention, a state in which the mind constantly labels experiences as either positive or negative, desirable or threatening. When operating within this state, every event is quickly evaluated and categorized. An opportunity may immediately appear frightening because of the risks it carries, while a challenge might be interpreted as failure before its meaning has even had time to unfold. Polarized attention tends to pull the mind towards strong emotional reactions. These reactions then shape how individuals respond and act within the situations they encounter. When someone becomes overly focused on avoiding negative outcomes, they may grow highly sensitive to even the smallest signals of potential risk. This heightened sensitivity can lead to defensive choices that limit exploration and growth. On the other hand, if someone focuses exclusively on what they desire while ignoring the realities surrounding them, they may overlook important signals that require thoughtful consideration. In this way, polarized attention behaves almost like a magnetic force that pulls the mind toward emotional extremes, where intense reactions begin shaping the perception of reality. Yet there is another form of attention that receives far less discussion, but plays an incredibly important role in transforming how we experience life. This second mode is often referred to as neutral attention. In this state, an individual observes events without immediately assigning them a positive or negative label. This does not mean becoming indifferent or emotionally disconnected from life. Rather, it means creating a small but powerful space between the event itself and the reaction that follows. Within that space, clarity begins to emerge. When someone develops the ability to observe with neutral attention, they begin to realize that not every difficult experience represents failure, and not every comfortable situation guarantees success. Sometimes events that initially appear unfavorable can later reveal unexpected opportunities. When the mind is not pulled immediately into extreme reactions, it gains the ability to observe more carefully, learn from unfolding circumstances, and adjust direction with greater awareness. The distinction between these two modes of attention can quietly shape a person's experience of life over time. Someone who constantly reacts through polarized attention may become trapped in cycles of strong emotions and impulsive decisions. Meanwhile, someone who learns to shift into a state of neutral observation often discovers a wider range of possibilities before taking action. Over time, this subtle shift in how attention is directed can open entirely new pathways in how reality is perceived and experienced. Once we understand that there are different states of attention, another important question naturally arises. If attention can influence how we experience reality, why do so many people find themselves trapped in repeating emotional patterns and familiar life situations? The answer is often not found in dramatic life events or major turning points, but in the small internal reactions that quietly occur within the mind every day. Many people spend much of their lives in an unconscious state of resistance toward experiences that have already happened. When an uncomfortable memory appears, the mind instinctively tries to push it away. When fear arises, the natural response is to avoid it or attempt to control it. When something does not unfold as expected, we often invest a significant amount of mental energy imagining how it should have been different. The paradox is that the more we resist certain experiences, the more our attention becomes entangled with them. Imagine trying not to think about a specific image for 10 minutes. The act of avoiding it often causes it to return repeatedly in the mind. This reflects a well-known psychological mechanism. When attention circles constantly around fear, past pain, or negative expectations, mental energy begins to revolve around those narratives. Over time, this can create the impression that life keeps repeating the same lessons in different forms. Not because the universe is intentionally testing or punishing us, but because the mind remains locked within the same pattern of attention. When attention is tied to the past or focused on avoiding certain outcomes, we often overlook new signals emerging in the present moment. An opportunity might appear, but it goes unnoticed because the mind is still analyzing an old disappointment. A new relationship might offer a different experience, yet it is filtered through the lens of previous emotional wounds. Gradually, these patterns can create the sense that life is moving in familiar circles. What makes this particularly interesting is that the cycle is often not created by external circumstances, but by the way we continue reacting internally to memories and emotions. When individuals begin to recognize this pattern, a profound shift in awareness often follows. They start to realize that trying to control every external event is not the only way to transform their experience of life. Instead, a more powerful step may involve learning to observe internal reactions with greater clarity. When attention is no longer completely absorbed in resistance, the mind gains space to notice new possibilities. Choices that once seemed invisible may gradually become clearer. Pathways that previously felt closed may begin to reveal themselves. In that moment, a subtle yet powerful shift occurs. Rather than allowing the past to quietly dictate the direction of the future, individuals begin learning how to observe it and step beyond those familiar cycles. Before we continue deeper into the next stage of this journey, take a moment to reflect on a simple but meaningful affirmation. If these words resonate with you, consider writing them in the comments as a reminder to yourself. I choose to direct my attention toward new possibilities. When a person begins to realize that breaking free from old life patterns is not about controlling every external event, but about redirecting attention, a natural next step appears. If attention can be guided, how can we actually practice this in everyday life? Many people assume that changing one's mental state must require complex techniques or special circumstances. But in reality, the shift often begins with very simple and practical steps. The first essential step is learning to pause long enough to recognize what is happening inside the mind in the present moment. In the fast pace of modern society, especially within competitive environments common across the United States, many individuals rarely allow themselves a moment to observe the thoughts and emotions moving through their awareness. When this pause never happens, the mind tends to operate on autopilot, reacting to circumstances without creating space for conscious choice. This is why the first stage of the process can be described as acceptance. Acceptance does not mean surrendering or approving of everything that happens in life. It simply means acknowledging that a particular experience exists in the present moment. When you accept a situation internally, you temporarily stop fighting against it in your thoughts. This creates an important opening because when resistance softens, mental energy is no longer consumed by the struggle against reality. The second step involves shifting the interpretation of the situation. When something unexpected or uncomfortable occurs, the mind's immediate reaction is often to label it as failure or misfortune. However, when we allow ourselves a moment of broader reflection, we can begin asking whether the experience might contain a lesson, a redirection, or an opportunity that was not previously visible. This reframing is not about denying difficulty, but about expanding the range of possible meaning behind an event. The third step is consciously redirecting attention toward what you genuinely want to cultivate in life. Once the mind is no longer trapped in resistance or endless analysis of the past, it becomes easier to focus on intentions, goals, and values that truly matter. This is where attention becomes a practical tool. Instead of being pulled into repetitive thoughts, you begin choosing what deserves your focus each day. A simple protocol that can be practiced immediately is to spend a few minutes each morning reflecting on 3 questions. What in my life needs to be accepted rather than resisted right now? How might I view my current situation from a wider perspective? And where do I want to direct my attention today in order to move closer to the life I want to build? When these questions are practiced consistently, they gradually reshape how the mind responds to everyday circumstances. Instead of reacting automatically from old patterns, you begin creating a new direction for your attention. Over time, even this small shift can influence decisions, behaviors, and eventually the experiences that unfold in your life. As we arrive at the final part of this exploration, an important realization begins to emerge. The most meaningful changes in life rarely begin with dramatic actions or loud decisions, but with subtle shifts in the direction of our attention each day. If you look back at everything we have discussed, you may notice a common thread connecting all these ideas together. Life is not only a sequence of external events unfolding randomly around us. It is also shaped by how we observe, interpret, and respond to those events. Our attention functions much like a beam of light illuminating the road ahead. It does not create the entire road, but it determines which parts of the road become visible and which parts remain hidden in darkness. When someone lives in constant resistance to the past or becomes absorbed in worries about the future, the spotlight of their attention often highlights the very experiences that reinforce feelings of limitation. However, when a person gradually learns to observe more clearly, accept what is present, and intentionally direct attention toward new possibilities, something remarkable begins to unfold. Opportunities that once seemed invisible start to appear more clearly. Choices that were previously hidden behind strong emotional reactions begin to emerge into awareness. Step by step, the experience of life begins to shift in ways that feel surprisingly natural. Perhaps the most profound lesson we can draw from this journey is that attention is not merely a passive reaction of the mind. It is a guiding capacity that quietly shapes the direction of our lives. Every day, whether we realize it or not, we decide what will receive our mental energy. We can invest our attention in old stories of limitation, or we can place it on the possibilities that are slowly opening in front of us. We can allow the mind to follow automatic reactions, or we can create a small pause that allows us to respond more consciously. The key insight here is not about trying to control every external event in life, because the world will always contain uncertainty and unpredictability. The deeper insight is learning how to guide our attention within those circumstances. When someone develops this ability, they no longer experience reality only as something that happens to them. Instead, they begin to participate more actively in shaping how they experience it. A practical way to apply this principle is to begin with the small moments that appear throughout each day. When a challenge arises, instead of reacting automatically, pause for a moment and ask yourself a simple question. Where is my attention going right now? Am I focusing on the problem itself or on the possibility of resolving it? Am I seeing limitations or am I searching for a path forward? Questions like these may seem small, yet over time, they can transform the direction of our actions and decisions. Each time we redirect our attention consciously, we also redirect the path of the choices that follow. And when these small adjustments accumulate over months and years, they can lead to meaningful changes in the way life unfolds. In the end, the goal is not to become a perfect person who never struggles or doubts. The deeper goal is to become a clearer observer of our own mind. When we learn to do that, we begin to understand that life is not only something that happens to us, but something we can participate in more consciously each day. Before we close this video, I would like to ask you a simple but thoughtful question. In your life right now, what do you believe has the greatest influence on your experience? External circumstances or the direction of your attention? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments so others can read different perspectives. And if this video gave you a new way of seeing things, consider subscribing to the channel to support future content and help us continue creating thoughtful videos like this.